Did you know that every single night, your brain literally washes itself clean while you drift into dreams? It is a silent, rhythmic tide that rises the moment your eyes finally close. As you settle under the covers, perhaps gently clicking the subscribe button to join us for this calming journey, your biology is initiating a profound shift. We often imagine that sleep is simply an off switch, a moment where the engine cuts and silence reigns. But the truth is far more active and intentional. Your brain does not shut down in the darkness. Instead, it changes its entire mode of operation, shifting from the frantic processing of the day to a distinct, restorative state that looks nothing like being awake. Consider the sheer amount of energy you expend just by existing. During the daylight hours, your mind is a bustling marketplace of sensory input, critical thinking, and constant calculation. This intense neural activity naturally creates debris. Just as a busy city produces trash that must be collected, your neurons produce metabolic waste as a byproduct of their hard work. This molecular clutter accumulates in the tiny spaces between your cells, building up like dust settling on a forgotten shelf. If you have ever wondered where the heaviness of a long day comes from, it is partly this physical residue of thought, a chemical weight that drags at your clarity. For a long time, this presented a major mystery to science. Where does all this waste actually go? Unlike the rest of the body, which has the lymphatic system to clear out toxins, the brain is enclosed in a rigid skull with no obvious drainage pipes. We now know that the answer lies in a specialized plumbing system that only opens its floodgates when you are deeply asleep. It is a concept often called brainwashing, but in the most literal and therapeutic sense imaginable. The brain actually shrinks slightly to allow a pristine, clear fluid to rush through the brain tissue, washing away the toxic proteins that have built up during the day. It is a literal brainwashing, a hydraulic pulse that cleanses the neural pathways. Before we explore the specific fluids that perform this nightly ritual, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Can you recall a specific memory of a time you felt truly deeply exhausted, perhaps after a long trip or a massive project, and the specific heavy relief you felt the moment your head finally hit the pillow? That sensation of heaviness is actually the precursor to this biological cleaning process beginning its work. When you succumb to that heaviness, the lymphatic system opens its hidden tunnels. The cerebrospinal fluid, which is clear and water-like, is pumped into the brain tissue along the outside of the arteries, sweeping through the spaces created by the shrinking cells and picking up metabolic waste before exiting along the veins. It is a high-volume wash cycle. This is not a slow trickle, but a vigorous flow that requires a significant amount of biological energy to pump, which is why the brain cannot do it while you are awake. It cannot process complex thoughts and clean the house at the same time. The brain must shut down its interactions with the outside world to turn its attention inward, opening these secret valves to scrub the corridors of the mind, ensuring that the biological machinery is pristine and ready for the intake of new information when the sun rises. This nightly ritual relies entirely on a crystal-clear substance known as cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF for short. For centuries, anatomists and doctors viewed this fluid merely as a protective cushion, a kind of saltwater shock absorber that kept the delicate gelatinous mass of the brain from bumping against the hard interior of the skull. While it certainly serves that protective function during the day, keeping your brain buoyant and safe from impact, its role transforms completely the moment you drift into unconsciousness.
It ceases to be just a passive cushion and becomes an active, pulsing cleaning agent, quite literally acting as the detergent of the mind. It is not a metaphorical cleansing, but a physical one. As the electrical activity in your brain quiets down and organizes itself into the slow, rhythmic waves of deep sleep, the cerebrospinal fluid responds in kind. It begins to flow in a powerful, synchronized rhythm, washing through the deep tissues of your brain in a way that is impossible while you are awake.
During the day, your brain cells are packed tightly together, busy with the frantic exchange of neurotransmitters and electrical signals, leaving no room for a deep clean. But at night, a remarkable biological transformation occurs. The brain cells actually shrink, reducing their size to create vast new channels between them, increasing the space for fluid to move by as much as 60%. Into these newly opened spaces, the cerebrospinal fluid rushes in like a gentle rising tide. It circulates deep into the neural tissue, reaching areas that blood vessels alone cannot cleanse. This flow is not chaotic or random. It is a majestic, hydraulic rhythm that matches the cadence of your resting body. Recent imaging has shown that this fluid pulses in time with your heartbeat and your respiration. As you take a slow, deep breath in your sleep and your heart rate slows, the fluid washes in. And as you exhale, it retreats, carrying with it the molecular detritus of the day. It is a slow-motion wave, rinsing the corridors of your mind roughly every 20 seconds during your deepest rest. This nocturnal rinsing is essential because a working brain produces waste. The very act of thinking, processing memories, and maintaining consciousness generates metabolic byproducts, essentially biological trash. The most famous of these is beta amyloid, a sticky protein that, if left to accumulate, forms the plaques associated with neurodegenerative decline. But a healthy flow of cerebrospinal fluid acts as a relentless janitor, dissolving these proteins and sweeping them out of the interstitial spaces down toward the liver and kidneys to be processed and removed from the body entirely. It creates a beautiful, harmonious image of sleep, a time when the physical tides of the body align to scrub the mind clean. This is why a night of uninterrupted sleep feels so distinctly different from simply resting your eyes for a few minutes. You are not just pausing your thoughts, you are physically rinsing away the chemical weight of yesterday. The grogginess you feel after a poor night's sleep is, in a very real sense, the feeling of a brain that has not yet been washed, still cluttered with the molecular debris that only this rhythmic, liquid pulse can remove. But for this liquid pulse to reach into the deepest crevices of your neural landscape, the brain must solve a fundamental problem of physics and space. During your waking hours, the environment inside your skull is incredibly dense, a bustling metropolis of cellular activity where space is a luxury that biology cannot afford. When you're awake, your brain cells are packed tightly together, shoulder to shoulder, to maximize the speed and efficiency of information transfer. In this state of high alertness, the priority is connection, electricity, and rapid processing, leaving almost no room for fluid to circulate between the neurons. The brain is effectively locked in a rigid, high-performance configuration, optimized for thought, but closed off to cleaning. However, as the conscious mind drifts away and the heavy curtain of sleep falls, a remarkable structural transformation begins to take place, one of the most surprising discoveries in modern neuroscience. In a feat of biological engineering that borders on the miraculous, the brain cells themselves begin to physically shrink. It is not a subtle shift, but a dramatic alteration of the cerebral landscape. Studies suggest that during deep sleep, the glial cells, the support system of your nervous system, manage to reduce their size, effectively stepping back to create new open channels where none existed before.
This process creates an expansion of the interstitial space, the empty areas between the cells, by as much as 60%. Imagine looking down at a gridlocked city where the buildings suddenly and silently contract, pulling away from the curbs to widen the streets by more than half their original size. This is what happens inside your head every night. The tightly woven fabric of the waking brain loosens, the knots untie, and the architecture of your mind shifts from a solid state of processing to a permeable state of flow. This opening of the floodgates is essential because the cerebrospinal fluid requires these widened avenues to do its work. Without this cellular shrinkage, the fluid would remain trapped on the surface, unable to penetrate the dense thicket of neurons to reach the waste products accumulating deep within the tissue. It is a precise and elegant trade-off designed by evolution. We cannot clean the house while we are living in it, so we must alter the structure of the house itself once we have gone to sleep. The engineering behind this is incredibly specific. It appears that the same neurotransmitters that keep us awake and alert, primarily norepinephrine, act as the guardians of cell volume. When these chemical levels drop as we become drowsy, the constraint is released and the cells are allowed to relax and contract. This creates a state of low resistance, turning the brain from an electrical computer into a hydraulic pump. It explains why restorative sleep feels so distinct from merely resting with your eyes open. Resting without sleep does not trigger this cellular shrinkage, meaning the brain remains packed tight, holding on to its metabolic waste. Only by surrendering completely to the unconscious state can the walls come down, allowing the soothing, cleansing tides to rush through the newly opened canyons of the mind, preparing the ground for tomorrow's thoughts. What exactly is being washed away in these nocturnal tides is a question that science has only recently begun to answer with clarity. While we might imagine the debris simply as mental clutter or the fading echoes of a busy day, the biological reality is far more specific, physical, and profoundly important for our long-term health. The primary substance being flushed out is a protein fragment known as beta amyloid. This protein is not an invader from the outside world, but rather a natural byproduct of your brain's incredible activity. Think of it like the exhaust produced by a car engine, or the sawdust left behind after a master carpenter shapes a piece of wood. Every time you solve a problem, recall a memory, navigate a new street, or even just perceive the vibrant color of a flower, your neurons are hard at work, and this work naturally generates metabolic waste. During the waking hours, your brain is far too busy processing the sensory overload of the world to deal with this debris effectively. Consequently, the beta amyloid begins to accumulate, drifting in the fluid and occupying the spaces between your cells. If left unchecked, these fragments possess a sticky quality. They have a tendency to clump together, slowly forming plaques that can disrupt the delicate communication lines between neurons. But beta amyloid is not the only remnant that requires attention. There's another character in this microscopic drama, a protein called tau. While amyloid floats in the spaces between cells, tau is found inside them. In a healthy brain, tau helps stabilize the internal structure of nerve cells, acting much like the crossbeams of a railroad track that help transport essential nutrients. However, these structures can sometimes collapse and become twisted, forming what scientists call tangles. Together, these amyloid plaques and tau tangles are the notorious hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. While hearing those names might feel unsettling, the story the brain tells us at night is actually one of profound hope and resilience. We often worry about these conditions as distant, uncontrollable fates. Yet understanding the glymphatic system reveals that we have a powerful tool for prevention built right into our own biology. Every single night, your brain engages in a deeply protective act. It is scrubbing away the very substrates of degeneration before they have a chance to take hold, effectively hitting a biological reset button. This knowledge completely reframes the concept of rest. Sleep is not merely a pause button or a passive state of inactivity. It is active, vigorous preventative maintenance. It is the difference between a house that is slowly gathering dust over decades and one that is meticulously swept clean every evening. When you close your eyes, you are not just turning off the lights, you are turning on the filtration system. You are allowing the cerebrospinal fluid to mix with the interstitial fluid, creating a washing solution that binds to these potential toxins and flushes them out into the body's general blood circulation, where they can be safely filtered by the kidneys and liver and removed from the body entirely. It creates a beautiful, harmonious image of sleep, a time when the physical tides of the body align to scrub the mind clean. This is why a night of uninterrupted sleep feels so distinctly different from simply resting your eyes for a few minutes. You are not just pausing your thoughts, you are physically rinsing away the chemical weight of yesterday. The grogginess you feel after a poor night's sleep is, in a very real sense, the feeling of a brain that has not yet been washed, still cluttered with the molecular debris that only this rhythmic, liquid pulse can remove. But for this liquid pulse to reach into the deepest crevices of your neural landscape, the brain must solve a fundamental problem of physics and space.
These cells are beautifully complex, shaped like stars, radiating distinct branches that reach out to touch thousands of synapses at once. If the neurons are the telegraph wires buzzing with messages, the astrocytes are the engineers, ensuring the lines remain clear, and at night, they become the diligent custodians of the mind. Their primary tool in this nocturnal cleansing is a specialized protein channel called aquaporin 4. You might think of these as microscopic water gates or sluices. Astrocytes position these channels specifically at the ends of their star-like projections, known as end feet, which they wrap entirely around the brain's blood vessels. This creates a specialized interface, a perivascular space that acts as the dedicated plumbing system for the brain. During the day, these gates are largely regulated to maintain a stable environment for active thinking, keeping the brain's ecosystem tightly controlled. But as you drift into the deeper stages of sleep, the astrocytes coordinate a massive structural change. They actively shrink, reducing their own volume to effectively widen the gaps between cells. Simultaneously, they unlock the aquaporin channels. This allows cerebrospinal fluid to rush into the brain tissue from the spaces around the arteries, driven by the slow, pulsing rhythm of your arterial heartbeat. It is a hydraulic system of immense elegance and efficiency. The fluid sweeps through the widened extracellular spaces, picking up the molecular debris, the proteins and metabolic waste products like beta-amyloid that have accumulated during your waking hours, and flushing them out towards the veins to be cleared from the body. It is a literal brainwashing, a physical rinse cycle that prevents the biological machinery from becoming clogged with its own exhaust. Yet this fluid exchange is not merely about hygiene. By resetting the chemical environment of the brain, the astrocytes are preparing the ground for something far more subtle than waste removal. Once the physical canvas has been washed clean, the brain is ready to engage in the delicate work of sorting through the day's experiences, signaling a transition from physical maintenance to the complex archiving of memory. With the physical cleaning underway, a secondary, equally vital process begins to stir within the folds of the temporal lobes. Here lies the hippocampus, a curved, seahorse-shaped structure that has spent the last 16 hours acting as the tireless receptionist of your mind. Throughout your waking hours, every conversation, every street sign, every sudden realization, and every fleeting moment of joy was captured by this diligent scribe. It records the remnants of thought as they happen, holding them in a fragile state of suspension. However, the hippocampus is not designed for permanent storage. It is merely a temporary holding bay,
a biological buffer with a finite capacity. You might think of the hippocampus as the brain's USB stick, a pocket-sized drive that rapidly collects files throughout the day but has very limited space. By the time evening arrives, this temporary drive is nearly full, cluttered with the sensory debris of thousands of micro-experiences. If you were to stay awake indefinitely, this storage system would eventually reach its limit, and new memories would simply bounce off, unable to find a foothold. Or worse, they would overwrite the previous data, leaving your recollection of the day fragmented and hazy. This is why the deep silence of sleep is non-negotiable. To save what matters, the brain must initiate a massive data transfer, moving these fragile files from the temporary USB stick of the hippocampus to the massive permanent hard drive known as the cortex. The cortex is the wrinkled outer layer of the brain, a vast library capable of storing a lifetime of knowledge, skills, and wisdom. But the connection between the small, busy hippocampus and the sprawling cortex is most active when the conscious mind shuts down. As you drift into the deeper stages of rest, specifically slow-wave sleep, the brain begins a rhythmic, synchronized dialogue between these two regions. It is a biological file transfer of immense complexity. Neuroscientists have observed that during this phase, the neurons that fired during the day to capture a memory, perhaps the route you drove to a new location or the face of a stranger, fire in the exact same pattern but at a much higher speed. This phenomenon, known as sharp wave ripples, acts like a high-speed replay of the day's events. The hippocampus essentially tells the cortex the story of what happened, repeating the sequence over and over until the cortex absorbs it, weaving the new information into the existing tapestry of your long-term memory. It is a process of solidification. A memory that was once as fragile as a drawing in the sand is etched into stone, becoming resistant to interference and time. This is how a fleeting thought becomes a learned fact, and how a momentary experience becomes part of your autobiography. Crucially, this transfer does more than just save memories. It clears the slate. Once the hippocampus has successfully offloaded its data to the cortex, it is wiped clean, scrubbed of the previous day's clutter. This is the cognitive equivalent of emptying the trash bin or formatting the drive. It resets the system, creating fresh, empty space for the next day's learning. Without this nightly brainwashing of temporary data, you would wake up with a mind that feels heavy, slow, and unable to absorb anything new. Instead, because of this silent, invisible exchange, you rise with a mind that is open, empty, and ready to be written upon once more. This clearing away is not accidental. It is a highly sophisticated biological strategy known as synaptic pruning, or perhaps more accurately in the context of adult sleep, synaptic downscaling. To understand why this is necessary, consider for a moment the sheer volume of sensory data you encounter from the moment you wake until the moment your head hits the pillow. Your senses are perpetual recording devices, capturing the temperature of the air, the hum of the refrigerator, the specific shade of red on a passing car, and the texture of your socks against your ankles. If your brain were to retain every single one of these inputs with the same priority as a meaningful conversation with a loved one or a crucial fact you learned for your job, your mind would arguably collapse under the weight of its own noise. The system would become saturated, buzzing with static, unable to distinguish the signal of what matters from the background hum of what does not. This brings us to the crucial distinction your sleeping brain must make between the signal and the noise. When you navigate your day, your brain creates temporary connections for almost everything you experience. Seeing the license plate of a car ahead of you in traffic creates a neural pattern, however faint. Remembering the face of a stranger you passed on the sidewalk creates another. But keeping these trivial details requires physical resources. If you remembered the color of every shirt you saw today, you would have no room left to remember the logic of a new skill you are trying to master. Therefore, the brain must actively identify these weak, incidental pathways and dissolve them. It is a selective deletion, ensuring that the memory of the car's license plate vanishes so that the memory of your friend's voice can remain. This process is governed by the principles of energy conservation and physical space. During your waking hours, as you learn and experience new things, the connections between neurons, the synapses, physically grow stronger and larger. They swell with the machinery required to transmit information. This growth is expensive. A strengthened synapse consumes significantly more energy and occupies real estate within the brain tissue. By the end of a long day, your brain's energy budget is stretched thin, and your neural networks are effectively maxed out. You are biologically saturated. If you were to continue without sleep, your neurons simply couldn't fire efficiently anymore. They would be too loud, drowning each other out in a cacophony of electrical impulses. Sleep provides the quiet necessary to dial down the volume. In the deep rhythmic waves of night, the brain engages in a global weakening of these connections to save itself from exhaustion. It is a process of subtraction. The brain reviews the day's growth and systematically reduces the strength of the synapses, shrinking them back down to a manageable size. However, it doesn't shrink them all equally. The connections that were heavily used, the memories of that important conversation, or the emotions you felt deeply, are robust enough to survive this dampening process. They remain standing, distinct, and preserved. But the weak connections, the random details of the passing car, the background noise of the street, are too fragile to withstand the downscaling. As the overall signal strength is lowered, these trivial connections are severed completely. They simply fade away, pruned like dead leaves from a healthy tree. In this way, forgetting is not a failure of your memory. It is a vital function of your intelligence. It is the art of removal. Just as a sculptor creates a masterpiece,
If you were to look at a readout of your brain activity during the lighter stages of non-REM sleep, you would see a rhythmic, rolling landscape of slow waves interrupted suddenly by rapid, tight bursts of electrical energy. These bursts, lasting only a second or two, look remarkably like a spindle of yarn wound tight, which is how they earned their name. But they are far more than just a visual quirk on a graph. They are the guardians of your slumber. Scientists believe that sleep spindles act as a powerful noise-canceling mechanism for the brain. When a car drives by outside or a floorboard creaks in the hallway, the thalamus generates these rapid-fire pulses to effectively jam the transmission of that sensory information to the conscious cortex. It is a biological blockade, preventing the outside world from disturbing the internal work of the mind. The more sleep spindles a person generates, the more likely they are to sleep soundly through a noisy storm. This creates a private sanctuary for your mind, allowing it to focus inward regardless of the soundscape around you. It makes one wonder about the sounds that we actually invite into that sanctuary. I am curious to know what your preferred backdrop for sleep is. Do you drift off best to the sound of heavy rain, the hum of white noise, or do you require absolute pin-drop silence? Feel free to share your nightly soundscape in the comments, as everyone seems to have a unique frequency that helps them let go. Beyond their role as sentries at the gate, sleep spindles perform a second, perhaps even more vital task. They serve as the high-speed data cables of the mind. It is during these specific bursts of activity that the brain moves fragile new memories from the hippocampus, a temporary storage site akin to a USB stick, into the cortex, which serves as the hard drive.
This transfer protects the memory, ensuring that the name of a new acquaintance or the steps of a new recipe are not overwritten by tomorrow's experiences. This transfer is often coordinated with another distinct electrical event called a sharp wave ripple. If the sleep spindle is the courier, the sharp wave ripple is the replay button. Deep within the memory centers of the brain, neurons that fired during the day to help you navigate a new city or learn a piano chord will fire again in the exact same sequence, but at incredible speeds. In studies observing rats learning a maze, researchers found that during sleep, the rats' brains ran the maze again and again in their minds, seemingly practicing the route while the body lay still. Sometimes the brain even plays these sequences in reverse, seemingly analyzing the timeline of events from end to beginning. These replays happen in milliseconds, essentially compressing hours of real-world experience into a high-speed data packet. This is the physiological equivalent of practice. You are not merely resting, you are rehearsing. The sharp wave ripple ensures that the lesson is not just retained, but integrated, turning the raw footage of your day into the permanent library of your life, ready to be accessed when you wake. But a library is not just a cold archive of data, it is a repository of human experience. And if every memory retained the visceral, stinging intensity of the moment it was formed, our minds would quickly become uninhabitable. Imagine if remembering a heartbreak felt exactly like the moment the heart broke, or if recalling a moment of fear triggered the same pounding pulse and sweaty palms years later. We would be paralyzed by our pasts. This is where the sleeping brain performs its most compassionate miracle, acting not just as an archivist, but as a therapist. As you drift deeper into the night, specifically into the state of rapid eye movement or REM sleep, your brain creates a biological environment that exists at no other time during your existence. It completely shuts off the production of noradrenaline. This chemical is the brain's version of adrenaline, the molecule responsible for anxiety, stress, and the fight or flight response. For the entire duration of your dream state, your brain is bathed in a neurochemical tranquility, a stress-free zone that allows you to revisit the day's most difficult moments without the accompanying biological reaction of panic. This unique state allows for a process known as emotional decoupling. Your brain takes the memory of a stressful event, the argument with a partner, the mistake at work, the near miss in traffic, and reactivates it within the safety of this adrenaline-free environment. It replays the narrative clips, but because the stress chemicals are absent, the emotional charge is stripped away from the information. It is like taking a live wire and carefully removing the copper core, leaving only the casing. The structure remains, but the shock is gone. In this way, sleep divorces the memory from the emotion. You wake up the next morning retaining the knowledge of what happened, which is necessary for your survival and learning, but you are no longer held hostage by the visceral feelings that originally accompanied it. This is why a problem that seems insurmountable at midnight often feels manageable by morning. It is not just the passage of time that heals, it is the specific, active processing of REM sleep that scrubs the anxiety from our mental slate. We sleep to remember the lesson, but we sleep to forget the pain. Without this nightly emotional scrubbing, we would remain in a state of chronic hyperarousal. Indeed, current research suggests that this failure to strip away the emotional charge during sleep is a key mechanism in post-traumatic stress disorders, where the brain fails to separate the fear from the memory, causing the past to intrude upon the present with undiminished force. But for the healthy sleeper, the night works as a soothing balm, gradually smoothing the sharp edges of our experiences until they become safe enough to handle. This nocturnal therapy doesn't happen all at once, nor does it happen uniformly throughout the night. It is a highly choreographed dance that relies on the specific architecture of your sleep cycles. For the brain does not merely switch off, it descends a staircase of distinct physiological states, each with its own specific job description in the maintenance of your mind. The first landing on this staircase is a fascinating borderland, a twilight zone that exists comfortably between being fully awake and deeply asleep. Scientists call this the hypnagogic state, derived from the Greek words for sleep and leading, literally the state that leads you into slumber. It is here that the rigid structures of logical thought begin to dissolve, replaced by a fluid, associative style of thinking that can feel remarkably like creativity or untethered daydreaming. You might notice that as the sensory input from the external world fades, a vivid internal show begins. Even behind closed eyelids, the visual cortex often remains active, generating phosphenes, those swirling abstract clouds of color, geometric lattices, and shifting patterns that dance in the dark without any light source to create them. Sometimes these patterns solidify into recognizable images, momentary hallucinations that flash before your mind's eye without a plot or context. It is also here that the echoes of your day make their final stand. If you have spent hours driving, you might see the road stretching out endlessly. If you've been out on a boat, you might still feel the phantom rocking of the waves. In a phenomenon famously known as the Tetris effect, named for the puzzle game, people who perform repetitive tasks often see those specific images drifting across their vision as they nod off. This isn't just imagination, it is the brain beginning its nightly process of sorting and prioritizing memory, refiring the neural pathways you forged most heavily during the daylight hours, checking to see which connections are worth keeping before the heavy lifting of consolidation begins. As your mind drifts deeper into this abstract theater, your body is undergoing its own profound transition. Your muscles lose their tone, a pleasant heaviness settles into your limbs, and your breathing shifts from voluntary control to an automatic rhythmic tide. However, this handover of control isn't always seamless. You may have experienced that sudden, startling sensation of falling, followed by a sharp twitch that snaps you back to wakefulness just as you were letting go. This is a hypnic jerk. While it feels alarming, it is entirely benign. One theory suggests it's an evolutionary echo, a primitive reflex from when our ancestors slept in trees, waking them up if they started to slip. Another perspective views it simply as a nervous system glitch, a misfire, where the brain misinterprets the sudden, profound relaxation of your muscles as falling through the air.
But the brain, eager for restoration, quickly guides you deeper into stage 2, the phase where you will spend nearly half of your night. Here, the external world begins to recede in earnest, and the biological rhythm shifts gears. Your heart, which has been beating a steady, demanding drum all day to fuel your movements and thoughts, finally receives permission to slow its pace. It drops into a leisurely, rhythmic lull, like a slow tide washing against the shore. Simultaneously, your core body temperature begins to fall. It is a deliberate cooling, a shedding of excess thermal energy to induce a state of hibernation-like conservation, signaling to every cell that the time for expenditure is over and the time for preservation has begun. Even in this quieting, the brain is not passive. It is actively defending your rest. If you could see the electrical activity of your mind during this stage, you would see sudden, high-voltage spikes on the readout,
known as K-complexes. These fascinating bursts of activity often happen in response to external disturbances, a car door slamming outside, a floorboard creaking, or a shift in the wind. Rather than waking you up to investigate the noise, the K-complex acts as a neurological shield. It suppresses cortical arousal, effectively telling the rest of the brain that the noise is safe, that you should stay asleep, and that there is no need to return to consciousness. It is a mechanism developed over millennia to protect the continuity of your sleep from the trivial interruptions of the environment. Yet this protection is selective, representing a brilliant evolutionary compromise. While the K-complex works to block out the hum of the refrigerator or the rustling of leaves, your brain remains a vigilant sentinel for specific threats. This is why you might sleep through a thunderstorm rolling over your house, yet snap awake the instant you hear a baby cry or your own name spoken softly. In this light stage of sleep, your mind is acting as a sophisticated filter, holding the gate shut against the mundane so you can rest, but keeping the latch ready to lift for anything that truly matters, balancing the deep need for recovery with the primal need for survival. But as the night deepens, that balance shifts decisively. The need for vigilance fades, replaced by an overwhelming imperative for restoration. You slip past the gates of light sleep and descend into the profound, heavy basement of consciousness known as slow-wave sleep, or NREM Stage 3. Here, the frenetic chatter of your waking mind, which continued as a quiet murmur in the lighter stages, finally stops completely. The electrical storms of the day are replaced by a different kind of rhythm, a majestic, rolling synchronization of neural activity. Millions of neurons, which usually fire in chaotic, individual patterns to process the complex world around you, now link arms in the darkness. They begin to fire together in unison, creating high-amplitude, slow-frequency pulses known as delta waves. Imagine a vast stadium where everyone stops talking to their neighbor and begins to chant a single, slow, deep note together. That is the sound of your brain in deep sleep. It is within this rhythmic silence that the most literal form of brainwashing occurs. For centuries, scientists believed the brain was the only major organ without a lymphatic system to clear out waste, a biological mystery that persisted until very recently. We now know that during these deep, slow-wave cycles, a hidden system of plumbing opens up. It is called the glymphatic system. As the neurons synchronize and go quiet, the brain's support cells, the glia, physically shrink in size. They contract, creating extra space between the cells, expanding the channels by as much as 60%. Into these widened gaps rushes the cerebrospinal fluid, a clear, watery liquid that usually cushions the brain and spinal cord. It pulses through the tissue in time with your slow heartbeat and the rhythmic waves of neural silence. This fluid acts as a biological detergent, washing through the microscopic streets of your mind to flush out the metabolic trash accumulated during the day. It sweeps away proteins like beta amyloid, the molecular debris that, if left to pile up over decades, can clutter the neural pathways and cloud memory. Every night you reach this stage, a high-pressure wash cycle engages to scrub the slate clean, ensuring that the remnants of yesterday's thoughts do not physically clog the machinery of tomorrow's insights. While the mind is being scrubbed, the body seizes this opportunity of total paralysis to rebuild its own foundations. This deep stage is the only time the pituitary gland releases significant bursts of human growth hormone in adults. It is not merely for growing taller. This hormone is the master repair signal. It knits together micro tears in your muscles caused by exercise, strengthens the matrix of your bones, and regenerates skin cells, giving literal truth to the concept of beauty sleep. The immune system is also restocked here, synthesizing cytokines to fight off infection. It is a period of intense biological industry masked by an outward appearance of coma-like stillness. This is the hardest stage to wake up from. If an alarm drags you out of the depths of delta sleep, you will experience sleep inertia, that heavy, disoriented grogginess where the world feels confusing and the brain refuses to boot up. That's because you're being pulled from the very bottom of the ocean, miles away from the surface of consciousness. In this zone, there are no vivid dreams, no narratives, and no awareness of self. It is a void of pure existence, a black velvet quiet where you are neither happy nor sad, simply paused. Yet, this heavy wash does not last forever. The brain cannot stay in this synchronized lockstep all night. As the cycle concludes, the tide begins to turn. The slow, oceanic heaving of the delta waves starts to break apart. The depths are about to be abandoned for a strange, paradoxical ascent. The cleaning cycle finishes, the waters recede, and the mind prepares to ignite into a new form of chaos, shifting from the deep repair of the body to the wild, hallucinogenic theater that awaits in the next stage. And just as the tide of deep sleep seems most profound, the rhythm changes abruptly, shifting gears from the slow, rhythmic pulses of deep recovery into something frantic, electric, and entirely unexpected. You have now entered the realm of rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, a stage so distinct from the rest of the night that scientists often divide sleep into just two categories, REM and non-REM. If deep sleep was a hibernation, this is a resurrection. The brain does not slowly wake up, it ignites. If we were to look at the electrical activity of your mind during this phase, the readout would be indistinguishable from that of a person who is wide awake, alert, and engaged in complex thought. This is why biology refers to this stage as paradoxical sleep. It is a biological contradiction where the mind is roaring with activity, burning glucose and oxygen just as voraciously as it does during the day, yet the consciousness is completely severed from the outside world. It is a state of intense internal wakefulness housed within a sleeping vessel. To protect you from this surge of internal electricity, the brain performs a masterful feat of biological engineering. As the cortex lights up, a signal is sent from the brainstem to the spinal cord, engaging a chemical lock known as sleep atonia. This is a temporary protective paralysis. The motor neurons that usually command your arms to lift or your legs to run are chemically silenced, ensuring that when the mind begins to sprint, the body remains safely motionless. You become a statue, imprisoned in soft sheets, while the mind breaks free of all physical limitations. There are, however, small exceptions to this rule of stillness. The muscles controlling the lungs and heart continue their essential rhythm, though they become irregular, fluttering in time with the phantom experiences of the mind. And of course, there are the eyes. Beneath closed lids, your eyes begin to dart back and forth in rapid, jerky movements, scanning the darkness as if watching a tennis match played at high speed. Some researchers believe this is not random motion, but that you are literally scanning the visual environments of the dream world, looking at the objects and scenes your brain is hallucinating into existence. This stage is not merely a theater for entertainment, it is a furnace for creativity. During deep sleep, the brain was strengthening memories, cementing the facts and figures you learned during the day. But in REM sleep, the brain stops trying to store information and starts trying to make sense of it. It takes the new memories and collides them with old, unrelated experiences, forging bizarre connections that a waking mind would simply dismiss as illogical.
As the body lies frozen,
and the mind burns hot. The stage is fully set. The cleaning is done, the safety locks are engaged, and the emotional engines are revving. The brain is now ready to project its own reality, spinning a narrative from the threads of your deepest fears, hopes, and memories. The curtain rises on the most mysterious aspect of human consciousness. As the curtain rises, we find ourselves not in a void, but in a vivid, hallucinated world. It is a strange paradox that when our eyes are closed, we see more intensely than when they are open. Theories abound as to why our internal monologue shifts from words to images the moment we drift off. The leading idea suggests that because the logic centers of the brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, are powered down, abstract thoughts can no longer sustain themselves as mere concepts. Instead, they must be rendered. A fear of failure becomes the physical sensation of falling. A desire for freedom becomes the impossible act of flying. The brain acts as a literal translator, turning the invisible language of emotion into the visible language of cinema. But where does the script for this cinema come from? In the late 1970s, researchers proposed the activation synthesis theory, a somewhat unromantic but fascinating explanation for our nightly adventures. This theory posits that dreams are essentially the brain's attempt to make sense of biological static. Deep in the brainstem, random electrical impulses fire during REM sleep. These sparks shoot upward into the cortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher thought and visual processing. Confused by these nonsensical signals, the cortex does what it does best. It synthesizes. It weaves a story to explain the noise. If a random neuron fires that reminds you of the smell of pine needles, and another fires that correlates with a feeling of urgency, your dreaming mind might instantly construct a scenario where you are running through a dense forest. It is a desperate feat of improvisation, a storyteller forced to connect a series of unrelated dots into a coherent narrative in real time. Yet many psychologists argue there is more intention behind the chaos than simple random firing. Consider the dream state as a digestive system for information. Every single day, you consume terabytes of sensory data, conversations, traffic noises, colors, news headlines, and subtle anxieties. If you kept it all, your mind would become a hoarder's house, cluttered and impassable. Sleep is the cleaning crew. The brain picks up a memory, examines it, and decides whether to file it away in long-term storage or discard it into the void. This processing often manifests as the bizarre replaying of the day's events, twisted slightly as they are fitted into the existing architecture of your memory. You might dream of your workplace, but the furniture is rearranged or the lighting is different, symbolizing the new information being integrated into old schemas. This recycling process explains one of the most unsettling facts about the dream world, the cast of characters. It is widely believed that the human brain cannot invent a new face from scratch. Every stranger you encounter in a dream, whether a background extra in a crowd or a significant figure guiding you through a maze, wears the face of someone you have physically seen before. They might be a childhood friend you haven't thought of in decades, or they might be the person who stood behind you in line at the grocery store 3 years ago, whose face you glanced at for only a fraction of a second. Your subconscious mind captured that image, stored it in a vast gallery of facial data, and waited for the right moment to cast them in a nightly production. In this way, no one is truly a stranger in the dream world. They are merely ghosts of casual encounters, repurposed to play a role in the theater of your sleep, acting out the remnants of thoughts you didn't even know you kept.
You may have experienced this strange phenomenon yourself, waking up with a profound sense of sadness, or perhaps an unexplained bubbling joy,
yet having absolutely no memory of the dream that caused it. The narrative has been successfully scrubbed away by the brain's nightly maintenance crew, but the emotional imprint, the neurochemical signature of that experience, lingers like a ghost in the machine. It is a fascinating disconnect between the amygdala, which processes the emotion, and the hippocampus, which failed to archive the story, leaving you to carry a mood that seemingly belongs to someone else. This persistence of forgotten fragments leads us to one of the most compelling theories regarding déjà vu, that sudden, resting sensation that you have lived a specific moment before might actually be a hiccup in this nightly filing process. One theory suggests that during deep sleep, your brain runs simulations of potential future scenarios, stress testing your reactions to conversations or places you haven't yet visited. It constructs these models to prepare you for survival, much like a pilot in a flight simulator. If the brain washes away the explicit memory of the simulation, but accidentally leaves the familiarity tag attached to the concept, you wind up walking into a room for the first time and feeling like you are returning home. It is not necessarily a past life or a psychic vision, but a glitch in the cleaning protocol, a mental soapsud left on the glass that distorts your perception of the present. Yet, not all remnants are accidental errors or glitches in the wash cycle. Sometimes the brain intentionally leaves something behind because it has finished polishing a rough idea into a diamond. We often speak of sleeping on a problem, but the reality is that you are handing the problem over to a night shift team that thinks in abstract associations rather than rigid logic. The fluids washing through your neural tissues facilitate new connections between distant ideas, unencumbered by the waking brain's censorship. This is why the solution to a complex equation or a creative block often arrives the moment you open your eyes. I wonder, have you ever gone to bed with a tangled knot of a problem in your mind, only to wake up with the thread loose and ready to be pulled? Discovering a solution that seemed impossible just hours before? It creates a compelling argument that we do not merely rest in the dark, we innovate. If this nightly renovation is essential for us, it raises a fascinating question about the rest of the animal kingdom. If the brain must shut down to wash itself clean, how does nature manage this necessity in creatures that can never truly stop moving? Evolution, in its endless creativity, has devised remarkable solutions to ensure that every neural network, no matter the species, receives its nightly polish. Consider the dolphin, a mammal that lives in a world where taking a breath requires conscious effort. If a dolphin were to fall into the deep, unconscious paralysis that we enjoy, it would simply drown. Yet their brains accumulate the same metabolic waste products as ours, requiring the same cleansing fluid to flush through the tissues. To solve this, dolphins and certain whales engage in what biologists call unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. It is a biological marvel where the brain divides its duties. One hemisphere remains awake, alert, and capable of surfacing for air, while the other hemisphere slips into a deep slumber, allowing the glymphatic fluids to rinse through the neural architecture. After a few hours, they switch. The left side wakes up to take the watch, and the right side drifts off to be cleaned. They are never fully asleep, yet never fully awake, living in a perpetual state of half-dreaming. This ability to sleep with one eye open, literally, is not limited to the oceans. High above the waves, the great frigate bird spends weeks on the wing, gliding over the Pacific. For a long time, scientists assumed these birds simply skipped sleep entirely during these marathons. However, tiny monitors attached to the birds revealed that they too utilize this split-brain technique. While soaring on thermal currents, they snatch mere seconds of sleep at a time, sometimes with only one half of the brain, and sometimes for just a fleeting moment with both. They navigate the winds on autopilot, cleaning their minds in microscopic increments while thousands of feet in the air. On land, the pressure to clean the brain drives even the most vulnerable creatures to close their eyes despite the risks. There is a stark contrast between the hunter and the prey. A lion sitting at the top of the food chain may luxuriate in 20 hours of sleep a day, allowing for a long, deep, uninterrupted brainwash. But a giraffe, constantly scanning the horizon for that lion, cannot afford such luxury. Yet the giraffe cannot skip the process. It manages with incredibly short power naps, sometimes standing up, totaling only about 30 minutes in a 24-hour cycle. The fact that a prey animal, for whom vigilance is the difference between life and death, still accepts a state of unconsciousness, however brief, proves that this biological cleansing process is not just a benefit, but a non-negotiable requirement for life. Even down to the smallest scale, the rule holds. Fruit flies, with their tiny, simple brains, show clear cycles of rest. When they are deprived of it, their proteins tangle and their memories fail, just as ours do. It suggests that from the complex folded cortex of a human to the simple ganglia of an insect, the buildup of wakefulness is a universal burden. The brain is an expensive machine to run, and the cost of operation is the production of waste that can only be removed by surrendering to the quiet. Whether hanging upside down in a cave, floating in a kelp forest, or curled up in a modern bed, every creature eventually bows to the need for this internal tide. If we trace that tide back to its source, we find ourselves drifting into the deep past, long before humans, or mammals, or even dinosaurs walked the earth. We find ourselves looking at the very dawn of life, where the line between waking and sleeping was first drawn, not by a complex brain, but the simple demands of survival. For a long time, scientists believed that sleep was solely a function of the brain, a necessary tax paid by high-level consciousness. But the ocean tells a different story. Consider the Cassiopeia, a primitive species of jellyfish that spends its life upside down on the ocean floor. It has no central brain, only a diffuse net of nerves, yet researchers have discovered that at night, its pulsing rhythm slows down significantly. It becomes less responsive to the world around it, entering a state that is unmistakably sleep. This revelation shifted the entire timeline of slumber, suggesting that the need to rest arose before the brain itself. It implies that sleep is not just a mental reset, but a cellular one, a fundamental property of life that likely emerged the moment organisms began to differentiate between the activity of the day and the stillness of the night. It is likely that in these earliest epochs, sleep was strictly about metabolic conservation and physical repair, a period for the simple cells to fix the wear and tear of existence without the distraction of moving or feeding. But as life evolved and organisms began to develop central processing units, what we now call brains, this ancient rhythm of rest was co-opted for a new, more complex purpose. The brain is a voracious consumer of energy, and as it grew in complexity, so did its waste production. The evolutionary solution was elegant. It took the existing state of sleep, which was effectively immobilizing the body, and upgraded it to include a nightly maintenance cycle for the nervous system. This suggests that the brainwashing function, that hydraulic flushing of toxins we discussed earlier, is actually a relatively modern add-on to a very old operating system. The brain essentially hijacked the body's downtime. As neurons became more interconnected and the sheer volume of biological information processing increased, the need for a dedicated cleaning cycle became critical. Evolution favored those creatures that could disconnect their consciousness to allow the glymphatic system to open its floodgates. Thus, the deep sleep that allows you to wake up feeling refreshed is the result of millions of years of fine-tuning, a biological negotiation between the needs of the ancient body and the demands of the modern mind. This brings us to a profound realization about the rhythm of our lives. We often think of sleep as a personal habit, something we choose to do, but it is actually an echo of the planet's rotation. For billions of years, life on Earth has evolved under the constant, unyielding cycle of light and dark. This planetary space.
Imagine a bustling city where the street sweepers never come to shift the debris of the day. The activity of the city continues, but the pathways become cluttered and the movement slows. In the landscape of the human mind, this clutter takes a chemical form. As you think, move, and perceive the world during your waking hours, your neurons are hard at work, and like any engine, they produce exhaust. One of the primary remnants of this mental exertion is a molecule called adenosine. From the moment you woke up this morning, adenosine has been steadily accumulating in your brain, drop by drop, minute by minute. It is the chemical hourglass of your consciousness. This is not merely a feeling of tiredness, it is a physical weight, a chemical demand for the cleaning cycle to begin. When we deny this pressure, the adenosine continues to build, crowding the synaptic gaps. The result is the sensation we distinctly recognize as brain fog, a muddying of the mental waters where thoughts lose their sharp edges and the world feels distant as if viewed through a thick pane of frosted glass. This accumulation of metabolic waste affects the very texture of our consciousness. Without the restorative wash of the glymphatic system, proteins like amyloid beta begin to linger where they should be flushed away. The brain effectively becomes a messy room. You may find that words sit just on the tip of your tongue but refuse to come forward, or that a simple task feels like wading through deep water. This is the mind operating under the burden of its own efficiency, struggling to fire signals through a dense fog of uncleared byproducts. If the denial of sleep continues, the brain eventually performs a gentle but non-negotiable override. It initiates what are known as microsleeps. These are fleeting moments, lasting anywhere from a fraction of a second to 30 seconds, where the brain simply disengages. Imagine a bustling city where the street sweepers never come to shift the debris of the day. The activity of the city continues, but the pathways become cluttered and the movement slows. In the landscape of the human mind, this clutter takes a chemical form. As you think, move, and perceive the world during your waking hours, your neurons are hard at work, and like any engine, they produce exhaust. One of the primary remnants of this mental exertion is a molecule called adenosine. From the moment you woke up this morning, adenosine has been steadily accumulating in your brain, drop by drop, minute by minute. It is the chemical hourglass of your consciousness. This is not merely a feeling of tiredness, it is a physical weight, a chemical demand for the cleaning cycle to begin. When we deny this pressure, the adenosine continues to build, crowding the synaptic gaps. The result is the sensation we distinctly recognize as brain fog, a muddying of the mental waters where thoughts lose their sharp edges and the world feels distant as if viewed through a thick pane of frosted glass. This accumulation of metabolic waste affects the very texture of our consciousness. Without the restorative wash of the glymphatic system, proteins like amyloid beta begin to linger where they should be flushed away.
The brain effectively becomes a messy room. You may find that words sit just on the tip of your tongue but refuse to come forward, or that a simple task feels like wading through deep water. This is the mind operating under the burden of its own efficiency, struggling to fire signals through a dense fog of uncleared byproducts. If the denial of sleep continues, the brain eventually performs a gentle but non-negotiable override. It initiates what are known as microsleeps. These are fleeting moments, lasting anywhere from a fraction of a second to 30 seconds, where the brain simply disengages from reality. It is not a failure of will, but a protective intervention. The sensory inputs are cut, the shutters are drawn, and for a brief moment, the brain attempts to force the cleaning mode it so desperately needs. It is a humble reminder that the biological imperative to rest is stronger than our conscious desire to remain active. But there is a comfort in understanding this heavy, foggy pressure. It is not a punishment, but a signal of a system working exactly as it should. The heaviness you might feel in your eyelids, the slowing of your thoughts, and the desire to drift away are simply the physical manifestations of your brain preparing to care for itself. By lying here now, settling into the quiet, you are accepting that invitation. You are allowing the cycle to complete itself. You are giving permission for the pressure to release, for the fluids to flow, and for the day's remnants to be washed clean, ensuring that the mind that wakes tomorrow is refreshed, polished, and ready to begin again. But this intricate washing system requires a specific trigger, a master switch that tells the biological machinery it is safe to begin the deep clean. Deep within the hypothalamus, nestled directly above the intersection of the optic nerves, sits a tiny bundle of roughly 20,000 neurons known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or more simply, the body's master clock. This microscopic command center is smaller than a grain of rice, yet it wields absolute authority over the timing of every cell in your body. It operates on a rhythm that has been perfected over millions of years of evolution, a rhythm dictated entirely by the rotation of the Earth and the rising and setting of the sun. For nearly all of human history, the signal was clear. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the fire turned to embers, the master clock received the message that the day was done. However, the modern world has introduced a complication in the form of artificial light. The screens we gaze into and the LED bulbs that illuminate our evenings emit a potent amount of blue light, a wavelength that mimics the brightness of the midday sky. When this specific light hits the retina, even late at night, it travels down the optic nerve and deceives the master clock. It tricks the brain into believing it is still noon. This deception has profound consequences for the brain's nightly maintenance. If the master clock believes it is daytime, it keeps the gates of the glymphatic system closed. The glial cells remain expanded, the channels remain blocked, and the cleaning crew is effectively told to stand down. The metabolic waste products, those remnants of thought and energy we discussed, are left to linger, waiting for a signal that never comes. This biological confusion is often why a night spent in front of a bright screen can leave you feeling groggy and unrefreshed the next morning, regardless of how many hours you actually slept. The wash cycle was never fully initiated. The bridge between this light signal and the physical act of sleep is a hormone called melatonin, often referred to as the vampire hormone because it only emerges in darkness. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland, a small pine cone-shaped structure deep in the center of the brain. It is crucial to understand that melatonin is not a sedative that forces you unconscious. Rather, it is the chemical equivalent of a starter pistol. It signals to the entire body, from the brainstem to the liver, that the biological night has begun. It lowers body temperature, slows the heart rate, and most importantly, tells the brain to prepare for the cleaning process. This brings a profound importance to the darkness of the room you are resting in right now. By dimming the lights and allowing the shadows to lengthen, you are not just setting a mood, you are communicating directly with your biology. You are removing the interference of artificial noon and allowing the suprachiasmatic nucleus to acknowledge the night. In this darkness, the inhibition on the pineal gland lifts and the chemical signal flows freely, gently guiding the brain away from the alertness of the day and toward the restorative, fluid-filled sanctuary of deep sleep. Yet the gate to this sanctuary does not always swing open easily. For many of us, the transition is not a gentle slide, but a frustrating standoff. We are all too familiar with the sensation of being tired but wired, a state where the body feels heavy, sinking pleasantly into the mattress, yet the mind remains electrically charged, humming with a restless energy that refuses to dissipate. It is a peculiar paradox of the human condition that we can be exhausted to our very bones, craving the cleansing wash of sleep, and yet be unable to cross the threshold into unconsciousness. This state is often driven by a physiological condition known as hyperarousal. In this scenario, your brain has essentially misunderstood the environment.
During a standard night, your brain initiates a safety mechanism called muscle atonia, effectively paralyzing the body to prevent you from acting out your dreams. However, in the case of sleepwalking or somnambulism, there is a glitch in this matrix. The brain does not necessarily sleep as a unified whole. Rather, different regions can exist in different states simultaneously. In a sleepwalker, the primitive motor cortex, the part of the brain responsible for movement and spatial navigation, switches completely on, while the prefrontal cortex, the center of consciousness, logic, and self-awareness, remains in a deep delta wave slumber. This results in a person who can navigate a room, open a refrigerator, or even unlock a door, all while their conscious mind is entirely absent, still undergoing that deep cellular cleaning process. It is a body on autopilot, moving without a pilot. Similarly, sleep talking, or somniloquy, occurs when the motor command for speech slips past the gatekeeper. The linguistic centers of the brain fire, stringing together words or nonsensical sounds that reflect the fragmented nature of the dream world, bypassing the logic centers that usually organize our speech into coherent thoughts. These moments serve as a reminder of the complex internal clocks and rhythms that govern our existence. Our bodies are orchestrated by circadian rhythms that dictate not just when we feel tired, but how our biological processes align with the rotation of the Earth. This timing is deeply individual, written into our genetics. Thinking about these internal clocks raises a question about your own natural rhythm. Do you identify more as a morning lark, feeling most alive and productive with the sunrise, or are you a night owl, finding that your clarity and peace arrive only after the sun has set? I would be delighted if you shared your natural preference in the comments, as it is fascinating to see how varied our internal schedules can be. Regardless of when you prefer to wake, understanding these rhythms is key to understanding the twilight zones of the mind. Long before we possessed the technology to map neurons or monitor the electric pulses of the cortex, the nightly disappearance of consciousness was a source of profound mystery. For thousands of years, humans looked upon a sleeping figure and wondered where the essence of that person had gone. It was not viewed merely as a pause in biological function, but as a journey into a separate reality, a twilight zone where the rules of the physical world no longer applied. To the ancients, the remnants of the day's thoughts did not simply vanish, they were transported to a different plane of existence. In the mythology of ancient Greece, this mysterious departure was personified by the brothers Hypnos and Thanatos. Hypnos represented sleep, while Thanatos represented death. They were depicted as siblings, often standing wing to wing, suggesting that the ancients understood a deep, intuitive connection between the two states. When you drifted off, you were entering the domain of Hypnos, a shadowy realm that existed adjacent to the finality of death, yet offered a miraculous return ticket each morning. This mythological framework implies that our ancestors felt the mind didn't just stop functioning, it went somewhere else entirely, guided by divine forces that ruled the underworld. The river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, flowed through the cave of Hypnos, suggesting an early poetic understanding that sleep was necessary to wash away the heavy burdens of memory. This belief that the self departs the body was not unique to the Mediterranean. Across countless cultures, from the Nile Delta to the dense forests of the Amazon, the dream state was often interpreted as the soul wandering free of its physical tether. If you encountered a deceased ancestor in a dream, it was not seen as a random firing of neurons in the hippocampus. It was viewed as a genuine visitation. The remnants of your daily thoughts weren't just being filed away, they were the luggage you carried into the spirit world. In this view, the night was not a time of rest for the mind, but a time of active travel. The body lay dormant, a mere shell, waiting for its inhabitant to return from its nightly excursion across the metaphysical landscape. As history marched forward and humanity began to trade mysticism for mechanism, the perspective shifted yet again. By the arrival of the industrial age, the human body was increasingly viewed through the lens of a machine. In this analogy, sleep became the off switch. The prevailing scientific wisdom for centuries held that the brain simply shut down to conserve energy, much like banking a fire in a hearth or stopping a loom in a factory. It was a passive view, devoid of the magic of the ancients, but also lacking the complexity of modern truth. We assumed that the remnants of thought, the worries, the calculations, the memories of the day, simply sat there, stagnant and frozen in place, waiting to be picked up again when the machine roared back to life at dawn. This passive assumption, however, turned out to be one of the greatest misunderstandings in the history of biology. We now know that the brain is arguably more active during certain phases of sleep than when we are awake, but its mission changes entirely. It is not shutting down, it is shifting gears. The modern understanding has moved from a concept of spiritual travel to mechanical dormancy. We are learning that the night is not when the factory closes, but when the cleaning crew arrives. The remnants of thought are not just left to pile up in the dark, they are actively processed, sorted, and quite literally washed away. This shift in perspective, from the soul leaving the body to the brain cleansing itself, transforms how we view those dark hours. It is less of a departure and more of a restoration, a biological miracle that happens silently while we lie unaware. While this internal washing is a universal biological constant, the way we structure our rest around it is surprisingly fluid.
If you were to travel back in time just a few hundred years, your nightly routine would look vastly different from the solid 8-hour block we strive for today. For the vast majority of human history, sleep was not a singular, uninterrupted event, but rather a two-part performance known as biphasic sleep. This initial phase lasted for about 4 hours, deep and restorative. Then, in the dead of night, perhaps around midnight or 1 in the morning, the entire household would wake up. During this quiet interlude between slumbers, people would tend to the hearth fire, pray, read by candlelight, or talk quietly with their bedfellows. It was a time of unexpected socialization and calm reflection in the safety of the dark. Philosophers of the time even noted that the mind was particularly clear and creative during this witching hour, free from the distractions of the bustling day. After an hour or so of wakefulness, drowsiness would naturally return, and they would settle back down for their second sleep, which lasted until dawn. It is fascinating to realize that the pressure we feel to sleep through the night without waking is a relatively modern invention. It arrived on the heels of the Industrial Revolution and the spread of artificial lighting. As street lamps pushed back the darkness and factory whistles dictated the schedule, we began to compress our rest into a single, efficient block to maximize our working hours. Consequently, if you find yourself waking up naturally in the middle of the night, you aren't necessarily broken. You might simply be hearing the echo of an ancient rhythm, a ghostly remainder of how our ancestors lived for millennia. Geography plays just as large a role as history in how we rest. In many warmer climates, the concept of a long, unbroken wakefulness during the day is just as foreign as the single sleep block. The siesta, found in Spain, Italy, and parts of Latin America, is not merely a cultural tradition, but a response to biology. Human alertness naturally dips in the early afternoon, a phenomenon often called the post-lunch dip, which coincides with the hottest part of the day. By sleeping during this time, these cultures effectively create 2 days in one, with 2 refresh points and 2 periods of productivity. Even among hunter-gatherer tribes studied today, like the Hadza in Tanzania, sleep is rarely a solitary, silent experience inside a climate-controlled room. Their rest is asynchronous. At any given moment during the night, someone is likely awake, tending a fire or soothing a child, ensuring that the group is never totally vulnerable. This wide variety of habits serves as a gentle reminder that there is no
When you drift off for just 10 or 20 minutes, you are engaging in a shallow, restorative dip. You are not trying to reach the ocean floor. You are merely floating. This brief suspension of consciousness allows the brain to clear away just enough of that accumulated adenosine to lift the heavy fog of fatigue. Yet it stops short of pulling you into the profound paralysis of deep sleep. This timing is crucial because the brain is a creature of habit. If you linger in that resting state for too long, crossing the threshold of 30 minutes or more, your neurology assumes that the long night has finally arrived. It begins to shut down the cortical factory, lowering your body temperature and engaging slow-wave sleep. If you are forced to wake up during this heavy maintenance phase, you experience sleep inertia. This is that profound, confused grogginess where the world seems too loud and your thoughts feel like they are wading through molasses, simply because you interrupted the brain before it could finish a cycle it thought it was supposed to complete. Therefore, the perfect nap is like a quick rinse, a way to wash the dust off the windshield so you can see the road ahead. It is a refresh, not a reboot. It clears the immediate chemical pressure, but it does not perform the deep structural janitorial work that happens later. For that,
the brain requires the uninterrupted silence of the night, where it can finally activate the specialized plumbing system designed to wash away the physical remnants of thought itself. This internal washing cycle is remarkably responsive to the physical shape we take when we lie down. It appears that gravity is not just a force that holds us to the bed, but an active participant in the cleansing process. Research into the mechanics of this fluid exchange has revealed a fascinating preference for position. While we might drift off on our backs or stomachs, studies using dynamic imaging suggest that the lateral position, simply sleeping on your side, is the most efficient posture for glymphatic clearance. It is as if the plumbing pipes of the brain align more perfectly when the body is turned, allowing the cerebrospinal fluid to flow with less resistance, flushing out amyloids and tau proteins with greater ease. This might explain why side sleeping is the most common position observed not just in humans, but across the animal kingdom, from domestic dogs to wild leopards, instinctively curling up to maximize this nightly restoration. Beyond the geometry of our limbs, the atmosphere of the room plays a critical role in how deep this cleaning cycle can go. The brain is a biological engine that runs hot during the day, processing gigabytes of sensory data. And for the structural maintenance crew to enter the building, the engine must cool down. This is why a cooler room often leads to heavier eyelids and a faster departure from wakefulness. Science indicates that the core body temperature must drop by about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep, and crucially, to stay in the deep restorative stages where the glymphatic system is most active. When the air around you is cool, ideally somewhere between 60 and 67 degrees, it acts as a thermal signal, telling the hypothalamus that it is safe to power down the conscious mind. It creates a thermal gradient that draws heat away from the core, acting like a release valve that allows the body to settle into the profound silence required for the wash cycle to begin. There is a gentle paradox in how we often achieve this necessary cooling. Taking a warm bath or shower before bed does not heat the body up for the duration of the night, but rather prepares it to cool down rapidly. The warmth dilates the blood vessels in the hands and feet, pulling blood to the surface, so that when you step out into the cooler bedroom air, heat radiates away from the core quickly. This rapid drop is a biological lullaby, synchronizing the internal thermostat with the external world. Furthermore, the medium of this entire cleaning operation is water. The brain is effectively rinsing itself, and just as a river requires volume to maintain its current, the glymphatic system relies on hydration. Going to bed significantly dehydrated can thicken the fluids, making the removal of metabolic waste sluggish and less efficient. These are not strict rules to be followed with anxiety, but rather soft invitations to align your habits with your biology. By simply choosing a cooler pillow, turning onto your side, or ensuring you are hydrated, you are physically assisting the brain in its microscopic housekeeping. You are clearing the roads for the maintenance crews of the night. It turns the simple act of lying down into a collaborative project between your conscious choices and your unconscious physiology, ensuring that when the sun rises, the mind is not just awake, but truly clean, unburdened by the chemical debris of yesterday. As the final cycles of sleep conclude, your biology begins a gentle, almost symphonic orchestration to bring you back to the surface. Long before your eyelids flutter open or you become aware of the morning light, your body temperature begins a slow, deliberate climb, rising from its nocturnal low. This thermal shift acts as a silent signal to your internal systems that the heavy maintenance phase is complete and the operational phase is about to begin. Accompanying this rise is a natural rhythmic pulse of cortisol. In the quiet of the early morning, this hormone acts not as a stressor, but as a biological sunrise, a chemical spark plug that gently revs the engine of consciousness to prepare you for the day. When you do finally stir, shifting the covers and blinking into the room, you are occupying a physical organ that is fundamentally different from the one that lay down 8 hours prior. You literally wake up with a cleaner brain. The microscopic landscape inside your skull has been transformed. Those interstitial spaces between your neurons, having been flooded and flushed by the rhythmic waves of cerebrospinal fluid throughout the night, are now pristine. The metabolic waste products, the literal chemical dust of yesterday's cognitive effort, have been swept into the bloodstream, filtered by the liver, and processed out of the system entirely. This physiological deep clean is the direct cause of that unique morning sensation of a blank slate. That feeling of mental crispness and renewed clarity is not just a psychological mood, it is the tangible result of a biological wash pressure. The heavy fog-like presence of adenosine, the molecule that accumulates to create sleep pressure and mental drag, has been dissolved. In its place is a chemical environment primed for new connections and fresh electricity. It is a total restoration of potential. And regarding those remnants of thought that swirled around you as you drifted off, the unfinished worries, the trivial details, the fragmented loops of daily noise, they have been masterfully sorted. The brain's nighttime wash doesn't just scrub away waste, it curates the archives. The unnecessary data has been pruned away, washed out with the metabolic tide, while the vital memories have been consolidated and filed into long-term storage. You wake up with a curated mind, where the emotional sharp edges of yesterday's experiences have been smoothed down. You possess a new brain, quite literally, ready to begin the cycle of accumulation again. It is a profound realization that while we surrender to stillness, our biology engages in its most dynamic performance. We have traced the journey from the moment heavy eyelids close against the world, signaling the start of the great internal shift. We watched as the very cells of your mind stepped back, physically shrinking to create space for the cleansing currents of cerebrospinal fluid to rush in like a restorative tide. This nightly ritual is not merely a biological necessity, but a rhythmic act of renewal, washing away the metabolic dust of thinking so that clarity can return with the morning sun. Through the quiet hours, the dream theater played its abstract scenes, sorting the gold of wisdom from the gravel of trivial noise, ensuring that what you keep is only what you need. This is the silent pact between the waking self and the sleeping mind, a promise that if you rest, you will be restored. It is a system of perfect economy, where nothing is wasted and every pause serves a purpose. As we approach the end of this nocturnal voyage, if you have found comfort in learning about the secret life of your brain, please consider subscribing to the channel for more calming stories and science for sleep. Your support ensures that we can continue exploring the wonders of the world together, one relaxing fact at a time. Now the cycle stands ready to repeat, as reliable as the moon pulling the oceans. There is a deep beauty in knowing that you do not need to command this process.